Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep into those recent allegations of misconduct swirling around the IRS. We've got reports, analyses, even some hypothetical scenarios all ready to unpack. So get ready to explore the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to the agency tasked with collecting your hard-earned money.
It's interesting, how the IRS tends to evoke such strong reactions from people. Historically, tax collection has always been a sensitive subject, and it seems like those ancient anxieties about powerful authorities and financial scrutiny are still very much alive today.
It's true. Taxes are never exactly a dinner table favorite. But this time, it's more than just the usual grumbling. We're talking about accusations of fraud, misuse of taxpayer funds, and even potentially unlawful targeting based on political affiliations. We're here to help you sift through the noise and figure out what's really going on.
Exactly. It's important to separate fact from fiction, especially when dealing with an institution as powerful and impactful as the IRS.
Okay, so first things first, let's get a handle on just how serious these allegations are. We've all heard the phrase tax fraud, but it's important to understand what it really means in this context.
You're right, it's crucial to define our terms. We're not just talking about simple mistakes on your tax return. Tax fraud involves intentional deception or misrepresentation for personal gain. Think falsifying income statements claiming bogus deductions, or even outright identity theft using stolen taxpayer data.
And the sources we're diving into today, they suggest that while there's no evidence of widespread systemic fraud within the IRS itself, there have been confirmed cases of individual employees engaging in fraudulent activities.
Yes, and this is where those isolated cases become incredibly important. For example, one report details an IRS employee who managed to embezzle over $100,000 by manipulating refund checks. This case exposes a vulnerability within the system, a way in which seemingly small cracks can be exploited for significant personal gain.
That's a sobering thought. An employee manipulating the very system designed to ensure everyone pays their fair share. And while this particular case was caught, it does raise questions about whether there could be other instances of fraud lurking undetected.
That's why it's so important to examine not just the allegations themselves, but also the systems in place to prevent and detect this kind of misconduct. Are those safeguards robust enough? Are there loopholes that need to be closed? These are the questions we'll be exploring throughout this deep dive.
Absolutely. It's not just about assigning blame, but about figuring out how to make the system stronger and more resilient. But before we get into solutions, let's talk about another area of concern highlighted in our sources, misuse of funds. We're not just talking about missing paper clips here, right?
Right. Misuse of funds within the IRS goes beyond simple wastefulness. We're talking about taxpayer money being spent on unauthorized projects, excessive expenditures, or contracts awarded without proper oversight. This is a significant issue because it diverts resources away from crucial areas, like taxpayer assistance and enforcement efforts.
And this isn't just hypothetical. The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, known as TIGTA, has flagged some pretty eye-opening spending by the IRS. Millions of dollars spent on luxury accommodations and lavish dinners. For IRS conferences, for example.
And that's just one example. There's also the matter of those employee bonuses totaling over $1 million that were awarded without clear justification. These instances raise serious questions about accountability and whether taxpayer money is being used responsibly and efficiently.
It definitely feels like there's a disconnect between the image of the IRS as this stern enforcer of the tax code and the reality of how some of those funds are being spent. It's enough to make you wonder where your tax dollars are really going, isn't it?
And that's exactly the kind of critical thinking we want to encourage during this deep dive. It's not just about accepting the information at face value, but digging deeper and considering the implications. These allegations of misuse of funds, if true, could have a direct impact on the IRS's ability to effectively carry out its core functions.
It's all about connecting those dots. Millions spent on lavish conferences could mean fewer resources dedicated to helping taxpayers navigate the complexities of the tax code, or it could mean less effective enforcement efforts, potentially allowing tax cheats to slip through the cracks. These are the real-world consequences we need to consider when evaluating the severity of these allegations.
And that brings us to arguably the most concerning and controversial aspect of this deep dive, the allegations of unlawful targeting.
Now things are getting interesting. We're stepping into a realm where perceptions of fairness and impartiality really come into play. This is where the IRS's immense power intersects with individuals' rights and freedoms.
You're right, the stakes are high. We're talking about the possibility of the IRS singling out certain individuals or organizations for audits or investigations based on factors other than legitimate tax concerns. Think political affiliations, personal beliefs, or even belonging to a particular industry that the IRS may have decided to target.
So not just who you are, but what you believe or what kind of work you do could potentially put you in the IRS's crosshairs. That's a pretty unsettling thought.
It is, and it raises concerns about the potential for abuse of power and the chilling effect such actions could have on free speech and civic engagement.
Let's be clear, though. At this point, there's no conclusive evidence to support these recent claims of unlawful targeting. But our sources do point to the 2013 scandal, where conservative groups applying for tax-exempt status were subjected to extra scrutiny, often based on keywords like Tea Party and Patriots in their applications.
That's right. And while the IRS argued it was about potential violations of tax law, the selection criteria raised serious questions about whether these groups were unfairly targeted based on their political leanings.
The 2013 scandal definitely cast a long shadow over the IRS's reputation, and it's understandably fueled skepticism about the agency's actions, even in the absence of concrete evidence in more recent cases.
Exactly. Even the perception of bias can be incredibly damaging. It erodes public trust and can make individuals and organizations hesitant to exercise their rights, particularly when it comes to expressing their political views.
So we've got the potential for fraud within the IRS itself, concerns about misuse of taxpayer funds, and then this unsettling possibility of unlawful targeting. Based on factors beyond legitimate tax concerns, it's a lot to unpack, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
You're right, this is just the tip of the iceberg. But by breaking down these complex issues and examining the evidence, we can start to understand the scope of the problem, and more importantly, begin to explore potential solutions.
It feels like we've uncovered a whole web of potential problems, from individual employees gone rogue to systemic issues within the IRS itself. But before we get too overwhelmed, let's shift gears and talk about solutions. Because the good news is, our sources offer some promising ideas for how to address these concerns and prevent future misconduct.
You're absolutely right. Identifying problems is just the first step. The real challenge lies in crafting effective solutions that promote accountability, transparency, and ultimately restore public trust in the IRS.
Okay, so let's dive into those solutions. One idea that pops up repeatedly in our sources is increased oversight. It's like having an extra set of eyes, constantly watching and evaluating the IRS's actions to ensure they're playing by the rules.
Increased oversight could take many forms. Strengthening the role of TIGSA, for example, would give them more resources and authority to conduct thorough audits and investigations. We could also establish additional external audits by independent organizations to provide even more layers of scrutiny.
Makes sense. The more checks and balances in place, the less likely it is for misconduct to slip through the cracks. Another crucial aspect of preventing misconduct is encouraging those who witness wrongdoing to come forward. That's where whistleblower protections come in.
Absolutely. Whistleblowers play a vital role in exposing misconduct that might otherwise remain hidden, but they need to feel safe coming forward. Robust whistleblower protections would ensure that IRS employees who report misconduct are shielded from retaliation, both professionally and personally.
It's like creating a safety net for those brave enough to speak truth to power. But even with strong whistleblower protections, there's still the issue of access to information. How can we ensure that the public has enough insight into the IRS's operations to hold them accountable?
That's where data transparency comes in. The IRS collects a vast amount of data about taxpayers and their financial activities. Why not release anonymized versions of that data to the public? This would allow researchers, journalists, and even everyday citizens to scrutinize the IRS's actions and look for patterns of bias or abuse.
It's like opening up the books and saying, here's what we're doing, take a look. That level of transparency could be a powerful tool for holding the IRS accountable. But it's not just about external oversight, right? We also need to address potential problems from within the IRS itself.
You're hitting the nail on the head. Internal measures are just as important as external oversight. One idea that has gained traction is mandatory ethics training for all IRS employees. This would provide a refresher on ethical standards, impartial enforcement, and the consequences of wrongdoing.
It's like building a culture of accountability from the ground up, reminding every employee that they hold a position of public trust and that their actions have real-world consequences.
And it's not just about preventing intentional misconduct. Ethics training can also help employees recognize and avoid unintentional biases or conflicts of interest that could compromise their objectivity.
So we've got increased oversight from both internal and external sources, robust whistleblower protections, data transparency to shed light on the IRS's operations, and mandatory ethics training to foster a culture of accountability. Those are some pretty solid safeguards. But are there any legislative changes that could further strengthen the system?
That's a great question. And yes, there's definitely room for legislative reform. Congress could enact laws that impose stricter penalties For fraud, misuse of funds, and unlawful targeting within the IRS, these tougher penalties would send a clear message that such conduct will not be tolerated.
It's about raising the stakes and making it clear that abusing the power entrusted to the IRS comes at a high cost. But tougher penalties aren't enough. We also need to ensure that taxpayers have adequate safeguards to protect their rights and interests.
Absolutely. Legislative reforms could include measures to enhance procedural safeguards for taxpayers. During audits and investigations, this could involve things like newer guidelines for IRS agents, stronger due process protections, and increased access to legal representation for taxpayers who feel their rights have been violated.
It's about leveling the playing field and ensuring that taxpayers have a fair chance to defend themselves against potentially overreaching actions by the IRS. It sounds like we've got a pretty comprehensive toolkit here for addressing IRS misconduct. But even with all these safeguards in place, isn't there still the potential for abuse?
You're right. No system is foolproof. There will always be individuals who try to game the system or exploit loopholes. That's why vigilance is so important. We as citizens have a responsibility to hold the IRS accountable.
So it's not just about relying on the safeguards to magically fix the problem. It's about staying informed, paying attention to what's happening with the IRS, and speaking up if we see something that doesn't seem right.
Exactly. We need to demand transparency, scrutinize the IRS's actions, and advocate for reforms that strengthen those safeguards. It's a continuous process, not a one-time fix.
Okay, so we've explored the potential for misconduct within the IRS, but we've also identified a range of solutions, from increased oversight and whistleblower protections to data transparency and legislative reforms. Now let's take a step back and consider the broader implications. What does all this mean for us as taxpayers and citizens?
This deep dive into IRS misconduct goes beyond just the agency itself. It's about understanding the delicate balance between government power and individual rights. The IRS wields immense power, and with that power comes a profound responsibility to operate ethically, transparently, and with respect for the very people it serves.
It's a reminder that no institution, no matter how important or powerful, is above scrutiny. We, the people, have a right to demand accountability and transparency from those entrusted with enforcing our laws, especially when those laws have such a direct impact on our lives and our finances.
And this isn't just about protecting ourselves as individuals, it's about upholding the principles of fairness and justice that underpin our democracy. A fair and impartial tax system is essential for a functioning society. When that system is compromised, whether through intentional misconduct or systemic failures, it undermines the very foundation of our democracy.
So what you're saying is that this deep dive isn't just about the IRS. It's about understanding how power functions in a society, how we hold those in power accountable, and ultimately how we create a system that serves the best interests of all citizens.
Precisely. And it starts with informed citizenry. The more we understand about the IRS, the tax system, and the potential for abuse, the better equipped we are to demand change, advocate for reforms, and ensure that the IRS operates with integrity and fairness.
So knowledge is power. The more we know, the more empowered we are to shape the system and ensure that it works for us, not against us. But we've only scratched the surface here. There's a whole universe of information out there about the IRS tax policy and the complex relationship between government and the people.
And we encourage you to dive deep, explore the sources we've shared, do your own research, and form your own conclusions. Don't just take our word for it. Engage with the material, ask questions, and challenge assumptions.
That's right. This isn't about blindly accepting information. It's about critical thinking, active engagement, and using your voice to advocate for a system that is fair, just, and truly serves the best interests of all.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we want to leave you with a few key takeaways. First, remember that the potential for misconduct within the IRS is real, and it demands our attention. Second, there are concrete solutions that can address these concerns and strengthen the system. And finally, it's up to all of us as informed citizens to hold the IRS accountable and ensure that it operates with integrity and fairness.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but we've only just begun to explore the complexities of this issue. Now we want to shift our focus to a specific case that illustrates the real-world consequences of IRS misconduct allegations. The 2013 targeting scandal involving conservative groups. This case provides a powerful lens through which to examine the potential for abuse, the importance of safeguards, and the ongoing debate over the IRS's role in our society.
The 2013 scandal sparked outrage across the political spectrum, raising fundamental questions about the IRS's impartiality and its potential to be used as a political weapon. It also highlighted the need for stronger safeguards to protect taxpayers' rights and ensure that the IRS operates within the bounds of the law.
So let's rewind the clock back to 2013 and delve into the details of this controversial case. What exactly happened? Why did it cause such an uproar? And what lessons can we learn from it today?
In 2013, allegations surfaced that the IRS had been singling out conservative groups, applying for tax-exempt status for increased scrutiny and delays. These groups, often with names including keywords like Tea Party or Patriots, faced extensive questioning, burdensome documentation requests, and lengthy delays in the approval process.
This sounds like a textbook example of unlawful targeting based on political affiliations, but what was the IRS's justification for these actions?
The IRS initially claimed that these heightened scrutiny measures were simply part of their standard procedures for reviewing applications from certain types of organizations, including those engaged in political activities. They argued that they were simply trying to ensure compliance with tax laws and prevent abuse of the tax-exempt status.
But many people, especially those targeted by these practices, saw it as something far more sinister, a deliberate attempt to stifle dissent and suppress conservative viewpoints.
That's right, the allegations sparked outrage among conservatives, who accused the Obama administration of using the IRS to silence their political opponents. The scandal quickly became a major political controversy, with congressional hearings, investigations, and calls for accountability.
It sounds like this case really struck a nerve, tapping into deep-seated anxieties about government overreach and the potential for powerful institutions to be used for political gain.
Absolutely. The IRS, with its vast authority to investigate, audit, and collect taxes, has always been viewed with a degree of suspicion and distrust. The 2013 scandal amplified those concerns, raising questions about whether the agency could be trusted to wield its power fairly and impartially.
So what were the consequences of this scandal? Did anyone face repercussions for their role in targeting these conservative groups?
The fallout from the scandal was significant. Lois Lerner, the director of the IRS division, responsible for overseeing tax-exempt organizations, resigned amid accusations of wrongdoing. Numerous investigations were launched, and while no criminal charges were ultimately filed, the IRS faced intense scrutiny and criticism.
It seems like a lot of damage was done to the IRS's reputation and public trust in the agency. But did anything positive come out of this whole ordeal?
Yes, the scandal did lead to some positive changes. The IRS implemented new procedures and safeguards to prevent similar targeting from happening again. They also increased transparency and accountability measures, including enhanced whistleblower protections and more robust oversight by TIGTA.
So in a way, this scandal served as a wake-up call, forcing the IRS to confront its shortcomings and take steps to rebuild public trust.
Exactly. The 2013 scandal was a painful but important lesson. It demonstrated the potential for abuse within the IRS and the devastating consequences of eroding public trust in such a vital institution. It also highlighted the importance of robust safeguards, transparency, and accountability measures to ensure that the IRS operates fairly and impartially.
It seems like the 2013 scandal, while deeply troubling, also served as a catalyst for positive change within the IRS. It forced the agency to confront its vulnerabilities and implement reforms to prevent future misconduct. But the debate over the IRS's power and its potential for abuse continues to this day.
You're right. The IRS remains a powerful and often controversial institution. Its vast authority to collect taxes and enforce tax laws will always be subject to scrutiny and debate. The challenge for the IRS is to balance its need for effective enforcement with the need to protect taxpayers' rights and maintain public trust.
It's a delicate balance, and one that requires constant vigilance and a commitment to transparency and accountability. So as we move forward, it's important to remember the lessons of the 2013 scandal and continue to push for reforms that strengthen safeguards and ensure that the IRS operates fairly and impartially for all.
That's right, the IRS plays a vital role in our society, but it must operate within the bounds of the law. And with respect for the rights of all taxpayers, it's up to all of us as informed citizens to hold the IRS accountable and demand a fair and just tax system.
So we've explored the allegations of misconduct, examined the potential for abuse, and delved into the complexities of the 2013 targeting scandal. But before we conclude this deep dive, let's take a moment to consider a hypothetical scenario that pushes the boundaries of our understanding.
Hypothetical scenarios can give a powerful tool for exploring the potential consequences of unchecked power and the importance of safeguards. They allow us to imagine situations that, while hopefully never coming to pass, force us to grapple with uncomfortable truths and consider the limits of our institutions.
Okay, so imagine this. What if, instead of targeting specific groups based on their political affiliations, the IRS developed a sophisticated algorithm that could predict individuals' political leanings based on their financial transactions, online activity, and social media profiles.
That's a chilling thought. Such an algorithm, if accurate, could give the IRS unprecedented insight into individuals' political beliefs and potentially create a system of preemptive targeting.
It would be like a thought police for the tax system. Individuals could be flagged for audits or investigations, not based on their actual tax filings, but on their perceived political leanings.
The implications for freedom of speech and political dissent would be profound. Individuals might self-censor their online activity or avoid certain financial transactions for fear of attracting unwanted attention from the IRS.
It's a dystopian vision, a world where the IRS becomes a tool for suppressing dissent and enforcing conformity.
And it highlights the potential for technology to be used in ways that undermine our fundamental freedoms. As technology advances, it's crucial to consider the ethical implications and implement safeguards to prevent its misuse.
So while this scenario is purely hypothetical, it serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of safeguarding our privacy, our freedoms, and the integrity of our institutions.
It's a call to action for all of us to remain vigilant, demand transparency, and hold those in power accountable. The future of our democracy depends on it.
That hypothetical scenario really gets you thinking, doesn't it? It's a reminder that the issues we're discussing aren't just about numbers and regulations. They touch on fundamental questions of power, trust, and individual freedom.
Absolutely. And it underscores why this deep dive into IRS misconduct allegations is so relevant to you. It's not just about some abstract government agency. It's about understanding how power operates in a society that you're a part of.
We've explored the allegations, dug into potential solutions, and even considered some unsettling what-if scenarios. But as we wrap up, I want to bring it back to you, the listener. What are your biggest takeaways from all of this?
For me, it's the reminder that even institutions as powerful as the IRS can be held accountable. You have a voice. And it matters. Staying informed, asking questions, and advocating for change. Those actions have a real impact.
I think you're spot on. It's easy to feel powerless when faced with a massive bureaucracy like the IRS, but this deep dive has shown that there are ways to push for transparency, demand ethical conduct, and ensure that the system operates fairly for everyone.
It's about being an active participant in your democracy, not just a passive observer. The IRS, like any government agency, derives its power from the people it serves, and that means you have a role to play in shaping how that power is used.
So what can you do? Well, for starters, don't let this be the end of your exploration. We've only scratched the surface here. Dig deeper into the sources we've shared, do your own research, and form your own conclusions.
And remember, this isn't just about uncovering wrongdoing. It's about understanding the system, engaging in informed debate, and advocating for a more just and equitable society.
As we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought. It's a question we've touched on throughout this episode, but it's worth pondering further. What measures would you propose to ensure the IRS operates with integrity and fairness?
It's a big question with no easy answers, but it's a question that deserves your attention, your thoughtfulness, and ultimately your action, because the future of the IRS and indeed our democracy depends on engaged citizens like you, demanding accountability and working towards a system that serves everyone fairly.
That's a wrap on this deep dive into the IRS. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep those questions coming. CMCO.